Hello everyone, welcome to this week's podcast of In Between the Pages. We're your hosts Zayn and
Dan. Today's episode will be featuring the novel All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven.
For those who aren't aware, All the Bright Places explores the young adult romance genre and was published in January of 2015. The novel revolves around a girl learning to live from a boy who wants to die.
It begins with Violet and Theodore meeting on the ledge of a school tower, both contemplating suicide. They connect in the center of death, one out of sadness, the other out of sorrow. Then they are brought together into a project that forces them to explore across their rural Indiana state, discovering beauty in unexpected places.
However, while one's horizons expanded, the other's world shrank. This novel deals with death, sadness, and suicide and depicts love on a canvas of agony.
In today's episode, we will be talking about 4 aspects of this book: the major characters, themes, symbols, and finally a few compelling quotes. Tune in until the end for an exclusive interview with Jennifer Niven.
So, the novel features 2 main characters, Violet Markey and Theodore Finch. Finch, one of the protagonists, is a 17-year-old adolescent suffering from mental illness. Finch is a loner, since his friends mock him and his family dynamic is mainly dysfunctional, and the isolated coping techniques he uses to keep his suicidal despair aside do not benefit him.
He has known anger issues, acts wildly, and typically does what he wants. For most around him, Finch disappearing for days or weeks at a time is normal. However, as the story unfolds, it becomes evident that Finch has a mental illness as he alternates between being awake and asleep. Finch appears to suspect he has bipolar disorder, but he refuses to be diagnosed or seek treatment because he fears it will reduce him to that label. Throughout the novel, he cycles through several identities, and each time he briefly adopts a new character. He utilizes these identities as a shield against his own weakness.
As a result of his sickness, he can be unforgiving of himself. In an ironic twist, he arranges many of his encounters with Violet to protect her from being too hard on herself, and his affection for Violet is genuine. And despite his harsh exterior, Finch yearns for acceptance.
Violet, the novel's second narrator, is introduced as a depressed and reclusive teenager dealing with grief following the loss of her sister. She performs the absolute minimum to get by at school and at home while avoiding displaying any excessive emotions.
Violet tries to alleviate her survival's guilt by not enjoying or going on with her own life, and she's overcome with grief for her sister. Violet's biggest interest before Eleanor's death was words, but she no longer indulges in her love of writing because it was an interest she and Eleanor shared. Violet's first step towards healing and discovering her identity apart from Eleanor's comes when Finch pushes her to pursue her hobbies.
While Violet takes her time approaching her more severe sensations of agony, fury, and pleasure, her capacity to share herself with Finch, rethink her connection with writing, and adjust her dynamic with her parents shows that she will easily make up for lost time. She allows herself to get caught up in the intense emotions that arise.
With that being said, the book talks about serious topics like mental health, suicide, grief, and purpose. All the Bright Places demonstrates how misunderstandings around mental health and suicide, as well as the pressure for individuals to seem okay even when they aren't, can contribute to difficulties with mental health. And according to the book, when people feel too alone and humiliated to seek help, they are more likely to see suicide as their only alternative.
The novel also demonstrates how solitary mental illness can be. Finch's condition makes him feel isolated and misunderstood. As a result, when he gets suicidal, he conceals the entire nature of his issues. At the same time, Violet is dealing with her loss of her elder sister, Eleanor. She believes that life isn't worth living without Eleanor and that she isn't ready to move on.
The story also emphasizes that nobody is always fine. Many individuals struggle with mental health concerns at some point in their lives. In the novel's first chapter, Violet and Finch are both surprised to see someone else up there, both thinking the same things. The fact that they are also astonished to realize that they are not alone demonstrates how isolating it may be to be suicidal or to be deep in emotional suffering.
The novel is heavily influenced by grief and tragedy. Violet is still grieving the death of her sister when readers meet her. Violet is considering suicide because she feels her life has lost significance. Meanwhile, Finch idealizes death and suicide as a result of his untreated mental condition. Violet and Finch realize as they get to know each other that having a purpose and connecting with others may be restorative. Even though Finch ultimately commits himself, Violet emerges at the end of the story with the realization that, as a survivor, she must cope with her loss in a healthy manner. The story emphasizes particularly via Violet's journey that it is hard to heal from trauma and focus on life without finding purpose and connection.
The story demonstrates how difficult it is to find meaning when one is beset by grief or mental illness. At the start of the story, both Finch and Violet strive to find meaning and purpose. After Eleanor dies, she abandons writing, something that she previously liked, which made her feel powerful and intellectual. In this sense, Violet's grief prevents her from understanding the point of existing at all, given that she can't write and will eventually die regardless. Finch's incapacity to find meaning is more complicated. Finch is extremely clever, but his untreated mental disorder makes it nearly hard for him to make decisions about the future. His goal is mainly only to survive his difficulties, and thinking about anything longer term is difficult.
Moving on, there are several symbols that appear throughout the book, but we will be focusing on two of the main ones, Eleanor's glasses and water. Violet's despair is symbolized by Eleanor's glasses, which serve as a measure of how well she manages to cope with it. Most people wear glasses to improve their vision, but Violet wears them to express her sadness, even if they trigger a headache. Violet also notices that when she puts Eleanor's glasses on, the world swims and warps, demonstrating how Violet's need to be connected to Eleanor is really destructive to her health and recovery. She is so consumed by her grief over Eleanor's death that she is unable to perceive or interact with the world around her.
When Violet comes up with a fresh concept for a collaborative writing project, she removes Eleanor's glasses and places them in her old room, indicating that she is both ready to think of ideas without Eleanor and ready to carry on. Violet's observation that she is nearly able to hear Eleanor laughing as she puts the glasses down and tells Eleanor that the glasses look better on Eleanor anyhow shows that Violet is aware that she would have rather that she moves on. Violet grows more inclined to understand that it is preferable to commemorate her memory by living than by attempting to transform herself like Eleanor. Finch then offers her a pair of goggles to wear on their trip to Blue Hole. She can see clearly with them, providing a promising glimpse into her future.
Water, the second main symbol, appears throughout the story in a variety of ways and represents the interdependence of life and death. Finch's love of water manifests itself in a number of ways. He swims in the summer when it's warm enough, and he practices holding his breath underwater for an extended time period. When Finch and Violet swim together, they have some of the happiest moments in the novel. The story makes it apparent that one of the main reasons Finch likes water so much is because he knows it can kill him if he allows it. As Finch's mental state deteriorates and he considers suicide, he gets more interested in water and even leaves clues to his locations that reference water for Violet. Water represents death in the case of Finch drowning in the Blue Hole.
However, it is crucial that the story concludes with Violet swimming in the Blue Hole on a hot summer day. She thinks of Finch when she swims, and she also thinks of each place she wants to visit in the future. This strengthens the concept that water represents both life and death, and that life and death exist in a precarious balance, especially for suicidal individuals like Finch. Water may make a person feel more alive, as it did for Violet in that moment and previously did for Finch, but it can also take a person's life.
Now, there are many quotes that are interesting and explore many elements and aspects of this book. We chose two that we think embody some of the themes that the book covers.
On page 15, Theodore Finch says, "The fact is, I was sick, but not in an easily explained flu kind of way. It's my experience that people are a lot more sympathetic if they can see you hurting, and for the millionth time in my life, I wish for measles or smallpox or some other recognizable disease just to make it simple for me and also for them."
Finch is bipolar. However, he isn't diagnosed until the conclusion of the story. His family does not think he is sick because the disorder cannot be seen or physically noticed by someone else. They simply believe he is a disturbed teenager who needs to be mature. And in this extract, Finch wishes he had some outward evidence of his disease so that the people around him could see that he isn't making anything up for attention. He's in pain, but no one is sympathetic since it's simple to dismiss.
The quote relates to the book's theme of mental illness because it shows how mental illness is often stigmatized, which can prevent individuals from receiving the support they need. Niven invites the reader to consider the sincerity of human nature and how easy it is to overlook things that aren't immediately visible.
Finch discusses his views with Violet in chapter 32 on page 223 when he says, "He came back, but when he left for good, he made it clear it was our fault. Our fault he came back. Our fault he had to leave. He just couldn't have a family." It emphasizes the enormous differences between his and Violet's families, as well as how little support his family offered him. Just as Finch blames his mother for the cardinal's death, his father blames his whole family for his departure, and every ounce of his family's attention is committed to sustaining the precarious balance they establish after he goes.
They are becoming more at ease with one another and their new family dynamic. Violet inquires about his father's new family when Finch notes that his father is unable to have a family. For Finch, this new, blameless family proves that perhaps it was their fault all along.
And finally, we have the exclusive interview with the author Jennifer Niven. Welcome, Jennifer. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me. It's wonderful to be here.
So the book deals with heavy topics like mental health and suicide. How did you approach writing about topics like these, and what kind of research did you do to make sure their portrayal was accurate?
Initially, I was worried about writing, but then I tried not to think about it because there's all this fear that comes with it since it's such a sensitive issue, especially since it's for teenagers. As an outcome, I might have easily worried myself out, and the more I began writing, the more it came out. I simply felt that I needed to write the story about what I knew and the boy I loved, and then I'd think about it before showing it to anyone to ensure it was done properly, because the last thing I wanted to accomplish, which I didn't, was glorify it. I was really close to him because he was my boyfriend, and experiencing that time with him and witnessing his battles with bipolar and his everyday efforts to be in the world firsthand inspired Finch more than anything else. I witnessed it and I shared it with him. I did further research and I interviewed others with bipolar disorder and reviewed interviews and memoirs, but it all came from him in the end.
What are some thoughts you'd like to share about your journey as an author?
I was very fortunate to grow up with a writer for a mother, which actually deterred me from being a writer for a while, because as much as I enjoyed doing it, I realized how demanding and stressful it could be at times. So I was fortunate in the sense that I already had the assumption that it wouldn't be all writing and excitement, even though most of it is. Looking back, I would tell myself to put my heart into things and not worry so much about what others would think. I've worked in a variety of genres, including nonfiction and adult fiction. There was a moment in my life where I was quite concerned about this because I wrote what I wanted to write. As long as you're writing entirely from your heart and you actually want to write, that's fantastic and all you need to do.
We don't have much time left, so those were all the questions I had for you today. I'm sorry for cutting it short. It's been great talking to you, and thank you for coming out here with us today.
No worries, I enjoyed my time here.
Thank you all for listening in on today's episode where we talked about some aspects of Jennifer Niven's book, All the Bright Places.
I hope you enjoyed this week's episode on our podcast, In Between the Pages. Make sure to tune in next week, Wednesday, where we'll be discussing Loveless by Alice Osman.
We have been your hosts, Zain and Dan, and we will be looking forward to seeing you all next week.